We're so glad to have everyone on the Friday afternoon series, and Debbie and I were just chatting, and she reminded me that it has been a while since Debbie McRae has been on this with us. So one of the times we had great plans to be on it together in the same location, and then at the Empowered Women's Retreat, and we realized how ridiculous it was to even try. So we abandoned that plan. So anyway, but Debbie McRae, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to the topic. What do you have for us today?
Well, today we are going to talk about how do we manage the ups and downs, those emotional ups and downs. And I've got some really great ideas today to share with you. So, what's recently shown up in my office are I'm going to give you about three scenarios that I've seen recently. One is the betrayed partner sharing with me that they had a very difficult, hard conversation with their recovering partner, and it caused them to become triggered and they went into emotional regulation. By the time I spoke with them, they had been emotionally dysregulated for 3 days. So you can imagine how difficult that is. Another scenario that showed up recently is that there is a recovering partner who comes in and shares that their betrayed partner wants to talk about the betrayal and they're asking questions. And of course, they're needing that information. And the recovering partner gets very, very defensive and borderline angry, lots of frustration. The third scenario is the client who came in and had had a bad dream, or they'll have nightmares. I see this quite often. And the next day, because of those triggers from the nightmare, the bad dream, they're very, very emotionally dysregulated and they're dealing with really, really hard emotions. So, all of these situations that I shared with you, they have a common theme, not only the emotional dysregulation, but they are caught in a cycle of reacting rather than being able to move into responding. So, this is a really important principle. But before we get into how do I respond rather than react, because my brain wants me to react because it's under threat, let's talk a little bit about the brain and what happens when you have trauma. So, I often use the hand for the model for the brain, and many of you have seen that. So, it kind of looks like a brain. This is the prefrontal cortex, the front of the brain. So, there in our frontal lobes is where we have logic, reasoning, emotional regulation. We have the higher functioning parts of our brain there. But what happens is when the brain senses threat, it's going to stop working from this part of the brain and it goes to the mid back part of the brain where my thumb is, which is that limbic region. So that's that primitive part of our brain. We refer to it as the fight, flight, freeze part of the brain. And we've got an area of that limbic region called the amygdala. So there's two amygdalas that start firing. So then the brain begins to go offline. So let's talk about what happens. The brain perceives threat, and we have something called the thalamus, which is a part of the brain. Again, it's there in that mid part of the brain that starts taking in all the sensory data. It filters it and it starts communicating to the amygdala saying, hey, we're under threat. So it's seeing things, it's hearing things, it's, feeling things. And then the amygdala goes, I've got to keep this person safe. And so it dips into the hippocampus, which is kind of like the file system of our brain. That's where we store all of our past data. So it starts to filter the experience through things that we've dealt with in the past, things we've done in the past. And the next thing you know, the brain is hijacked. And the brain's going, it's no longer safe. We have got to be on high alert. And so what happens is you get caught in this stress response cycle. So then the pituitary comes in and we've got stress hormones. We've got, things like adrenaline. We have things like cortisol. It comes in. And so what happens is it's going to mobilize the body. And the body's going to either move into fight or flight, meaning I'm going to fight for survival, or I'm going to run away from the situation that's threatening. Or if it can't mobilize, then it's going to immobilize, meaning it's going to shut down, and I'm going to go into freeze. Now, the important thing to remember is that the prefrontal cortex, those frontal lobes, become disabled. That's why we call it your brain becomes offline. meaning it's no longer functioning where it's the most helpful to us. So when that happens, then we go into the state of hypervigilance. So there's no longer any clear thinking. We no longer can manage our feelings because we are caught in that reaction cycle. And so the key to healing is we've got to begin to recognize when it's happening. So one of the things I stress with my clients and my group members is you have to become internally aware of what's happening inside of you, because your brain, without you knowing it, is constantly scanning the environment. It's constantly looking for threats. So as a betrayed partner, we do go into hypervigilance because we're looking for anything that indicates to us that staying attached to the partner who is in recovery, right, is threatening to that attachment. I'm no longer feeling safe and secure. So the things you're going to notice you going into when you're reacting, when your brain is offline, is you're going to have those intrusive thoughts. You're going to have that constant monkey mind, I call it, that constant chattering in your head that really distracts you from living in the present moment. And our monkey minds like to chatter inside, and we go into a narrative where we're talking about things in the past. We're also projecting into the future. There might be nightmares, like I mentioned before, bad dreams. We might even have intrusive images that come into our minds. There's going to be some avoidance behaviors. Sometimes it's shutting down, it's not talking, it's moving further away from the other partner. And like I mentioned, there's this hypervigilance. So in codependence, we refer to the safety seeking that often happens when that betrayed partner is trying to determine if the relationship is safe. So constantly looking for threats. So it might be asking a lot of questions. It could be looking through all of the financials. It might be checking phones. It might be having locations turned on so you can see where the partner's at. If they say they're going to be at a meeting, then you see that they're at the meeting. And that's part of that hypervigilance that comes from our brains when we have betrayal trauma being stuck in that part of the brain, which is telling us that we're not safe. There's anger. Some people even move into rage. There's anxiety. There's sleep issues. Sometimes you can't sleep. There's a lot of fearfulness. We've talked a lot in the past about that fear cycle. So I might move into some controlling behaviors. There could be isolation where I'm pulling away. It's just too much. So I might not be reaching out to my support people. I'm pulling away from the partner in recovery. There's changes in appetite. There can be uncontrollable crying or sadness or bursts of crying. I felt like when I was in betrayal trauma that I cried every day for a number of years. And sometimes that moves us into depression. And in some really severe cases, I have clients who even move into some suicidal ideation. And again, that's our brain being stuck in that reactive cycle. So we've got to talk about, how do I get out of the cycle? And as I talk about this today, I want you to recognize that everybody's on a different spot in that journey of healing. So like Tammy mentioned earlier, pick one thing you can do. The expectation is not that you do everything all at once, because none of us are perfect at everything. The other fact is that most of us find 2 or 3 things that work, and that's what we use time and time again. Sometimes it's very overwhelming when somebody says, hey, you need to get regulated. What I want you to do is to start just being aware. So getting out of this reactive cycle, meaning brain going offline, is all about awareness, tuning into your body. So lots of times I will ask those that I work with, okay, I want you to notice, where do you feel some of those distressing emotions in your body? So where do you feel anger? And clients always can point to the part of their body where they feel anger. So it's in my head. I had somebody say it's in my hands. I'll say, where's anxiety in your body? Where do you hold it? Where do you feel it? So everybody can go through. So my recommendation is that you start to identify, where do I feel anxiety in my body? Where do I feel abandonment and rejection in my body? Where do I feel the sadness? Where do I feel anger? And be aware of any physiological changes that occur, because that's going to be your clue that you're moving into being triggered. So we have to be aware and know when it's coming on. For some of you, you might be stuck in it in this moment and you're thinking, gosh, I don't even know. I can't even be aware. I've got all of this happening at once. That's okay. You already know and you're aware of the fact that you're in overwhelm. You've got so much happening. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between then reacting and responding. This is one of the principles and concepts that I learned in my betrayal trauma that had a very big impact. So when we react, what it looks like is there's a trigger and then there's an automatic reaction. It is within milliseconds. So it's very automatic. It's going to be consistent. And so I have a trigger, I move into anger. I have a trigger, I withdraw. I have a trigger, I go into anxiety. And then what happens is I am in a cycle that repeats itself. It's very repetitive. And as a result, because of the unawareness of what's going on, we kind of repeat history. We have undesirable results. We get stuck in our healing. If we're an addict, we're stuck in the addiction cycle. So it's important to understand that there is a bit of a space or a gap between trigger and reaction. So today we're going to talk about the point of choice. Believe it or not, even though it feels like I'm triggered and I move right into something, we do have the ability to pause. So I love talking about how do we take that pause, or take that point of choice rather, and create a pause around it so that we're not going into the same emotions. We're not having the same bad results. Because when we react, we typically move into a defensive position. We do that because we feel we are either at a disadvantage or we feel like we're out of control. And we're operating from a place of fear. That is so understandable. The problem is we end up becoming almost a slave to our emotions. And our emotions are great and wonderful. And I've talked so much in the past about we don't suppress emotions. We thank emotions for showing up. We learn from emotions. Emotions are there to make us aware of something and to move us into taking action. But at times when emotions are out of control, they have the opposite effect. So emotions, without being able to tap in to prefrontal cortex, means that we're very reactionary. Our behavior is so just automatic and we're reacting all the time. And this becomes counterproductive in our healing. So what we want to do is we want you to move into the idea of responding. So what happens, like I said earlier with responding, is I have a trigger, but I know I've got a choice. So I'm going to take a pause. And I'm going to give you all sorts of ideas on how do you use the pause then to then move into determining how you're going to respond. And that's where we have growth. That's where we have healing. That's where we have awareness. And so at some point, and mind you, I'm talking to those in the recovery process where you're out of the crisis period. You really are. Although you can implement some of these tools, but lots of times we've got to stabilize. And so it's understandable for the first 3 to 12 months for some people, they might be trying to just stabilize. So we're looking at more like taking this crisis you're in, getting you stabilized. However, you can still remember that there's things we can do to take a pause. And I'll give you more ideas on that in just a minute. So what happens with responding rather than reacting is everything's based on connected to the prefrontal cortex. There's logic, reasoning, there's emotional regulation, and we can move into making decisions and choices that are healthier. So when I go into my hypervigilance, right, I can slow it down, take a pause, choose to respond, and I can put into place some healthier safety seeking. So it might be that we do a check-in 3 times a week, and that's when I ask questions, as opposed to approaching my partner with 100 questions every day. So we have strategies. We feel like we have a little more control of the outcome, believe it or not, even though it feels counterintuitive to say, slow it down, take a pause, when your brain and your body is telling you it's time to really get into it and fight to find some type of safety. But choosing to respond rather than act really does help one feel in more control. And again, like I told you, we've got to do it in that state of awareness, and that's where the growth comes in. So let's talk about the power of the pause, I call it. This is where we're going to utilize the point of choice. And with this, I really love putting boundaries in place around this. So I sometimes refer to this as pause boundaries. So in a challenging or a distressing situation, it's really important, like I said, to recognize when I am triggered. So I want you to think about when I'm triggered, I'm going to put myself in timeout. Or if somebody triggers me and I am in communication with them, I'm interacting with them, and I get triggered, I call a timeout or a pause. Oftentimes I refer to timeouts as taking a pause. And then what we're going to do is we're going to need at least 20 to 30 minutes to allow the brain to get back online. And during that 20 to 30 minutes, you need to be actively doing something. If you haven't done a lot of practice with self-care or with doing things that connect to the prefrontal cortex, it might take you a little bit longer. And that's understandable. The brain is an interesting organ. The more you do something, the quicker the brain goes, oh, I know what we're doing. I now know that I need to go into a calm state. So the important thing is that I am aware, I know I'm triggered. And by the way, with the trigger, it is not your fault if you're a betrayed partner and you get triggered. This comes from out of nowhere many times. It could be anything that causes me to get triggered. It could be a memory about a vacation. It could be a smell. It could be something I see that comes on TV. Remember, these are things that happen that we have no control over. What you do have control over, though, is taking the pause and slowing it down. So here's some of my favorite pause tools. So let me just go back and just say one other thing that I thought of, and that is really taking a pause is what I call an internal boundary. That's a boundary I put in place with myself so that other people are safe when they're in relationship with me. So if I have that internal boundary that when I'm triggered, right, that I'm going to take the time out and I'm going to take a pause and I'm going to move into some of these activities and behaviors we're going to talk about, that is a healthy internal boundary. I can also have that as an external boundary, meaning that's a boundary that I put in place or the framework I put in place so that the other person, I'm safe with them. So that might be if I see somebody going into reaction, then I call the pause if we're interacting with each other and we slow it down. And we have to take a break for at least 20 to 30 minutes if you're really good at regulating and getting your brain back online. So the first pause tool we're going to talk about is breathing. So I'm going to give you several ideas on breathing. One of my favorite breaths, which is so simple, is something I call a signal breath or the big sigh. So with this, it's a very rapid breath in through your nose and then just out. And it's important that as you exhale out through your mouth, you make a sound. So it could be breathing in through your nose and a s. Some people like a ah sound, but it's amazing. You will notice immediately an internal change in your body. It's almost like you're letting out the stress that's there. So I love using that breath prior to moving in to some of the other breathing techniques. So one of my favorite techniques, and we often don't talk about it, is what I call circle breathing. So with circle breathing, I imagine that I've got a circle in my mind that I'm tracing. So as I'm breathing in, I'm tracing to the top of the circle. And then as I breathe out, I am tracing to the bottom of the circle. I like to count with it. So in my head, I would say something like breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. And then my favorite thing to do is signal breath. Then I do circle breathing and I say an affirmation as I begin to breathe in. So the affirmation can be very simple. It can be something like, I'm safe, I'm calm, I can handle anything. So what it tells the brain is it's okay to be safe, it's okay to be calm, you're going to be okay. So it's really a very effective way to help calm your system down. The other thing I like is mindful breathing. So with that, it would be as I'm doing my breathing, I'm focusing on the inhalation and the exhalation. So I inhale and I notice the cool air as it comes in. As I exhale out, I'm noticing the warm air as I breathe out. I might focus on body awareness. So sometimes with my breathing, what I'll do is I'll imagine that as I'm breathing in calm. And as I'm breathing out the tension or the stress. So I even do that with colors. So I might imagine I'm breathing in pink because that represents calm to me, and I might be breathing out black. So with that, I am telling my body and my brain to calm down. Really, really great breathing tools. Another one that you often hear of is the 4-7-8 breathing. Again, we're combining counting with breathing. Now, when I'm counting, it is a technique to connect to prefrontal again. So I'm going to breathe in through my nose quickly to the count of 4. Then I exhale for the count of 7, and I hold the breath for the count of 8. And so what I'm doing is, as I repeat that several times, I'm thinking those numbers in my mind, and my system regulates. And this is very, very effective. Some people also do box breathing. Box breathing is where we breathe in slowly to 4, hold it for 4, breathe out slowly for 4, and hold it for 4. And that's a very deep belly breath. And so what we're doing is we're stimulating, the diaphragm is actually moving. So we're stimulating that vagal nerve. And when we stimulate the vagal or the vagus nerve, we are telling the calm part of our nervous system to turn on. So that's a very, very effective way. Again, when I need to take a pause, this is a great way to regulate. The other thing I love are what I call thought stopping techniques. So the second tool is learning to stop your thoughts. Now, our brain has a narrative. So based on what we've experienced in the past, what's going on currently, we move into a story. So again, hippocampus brings forward all the data from the past. I move into my stories, and then all of a sudden, my body starts reacting even more. So one of the things I tell my clients to do in the very early days of recovery is catch yourself when you're in a story, when you're in your monkey mind, and just say, stop it. I'm not going to go there. And then you can move into an affirmation and then do a distractive type of activity that's healthy. You can even kind of challenge that. I will say, stop it. I'm not going there. That's not completely true. What is true is that right now I'm in a moment of crisis, or right now I'm experiencing betrayal trauma. I'm not always going to feel like this because I'm doing all the work I can possibly do right now, right? So we want to not stay in our stories. Yes, our stories are true. I know our stories are there to keep us safe, but our stories can also take us down a rabbit hole where we're more likely to react rather than respond. Another thing that I'll tell clients to do is if your thoughts are really crazy and you can't get them to stop, then tap the sides of your heads and go, stop it, 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 at least 7 times. It's almost like I'm resetting my brain, right? And then I want you to go do something that is a healthy distraction. So go walking while listening to music. So do that bilateral movement. Put on bilateral music. That's the music that goes from one of your AirPods to the next, or your headphones. So it's going back and forth. It calms the brain. Anything with bilateral. So do some breathing and cross-body tapping, right? And again, if you use your affirmations, it's a great way to get out of your story. Another way is, I call it, dump all of the things that are in your head. Get all those words out. So get a journal or some type of a notebook and a piece of paper and just write all the things that your monkey mind's telling you. And I want you to imagine that as you're doing that, you're getting it out of your head and you're putting it on paper. And then the next time you get triggered and you've got that monkey mind going, get your journal out and dump it. Doesn't matter what you're writing, and you're just going to leave it there. You're not going to go back and read it. We just want it out of your head and out of your body. So it's really important that you have some type of a plan for when monkey mind comes up, because it will come up. Your stories are going to be really an important part of keeping you safe, but we can also manage them. Okay. The next one is, of course, we talk about meditation practices. So one of the quickest ways to regulate I love is the five senses exercise. And with the five senses exercise, I love to have clients put their feet on the ground. We put on essential oils. So the essential oils might go on their wrist if you can use essential oils. I have them take their wrist and then tap a little bit on the tip of their nose. And then what I have them do is I have them share with me 5 things that they see. And I want them to add a descriptive word. So it might be a round clock. It might be a yellow pillow. So they're giving me a descriptive word of what they see. When I combine it, I'm having to connect to prefrontal. And then I have them tune into their body. Notice your body. What are you feeling with your body? What's touching your body right now? And so they'll say, it's my hair on my cheek or my feet on the ground. Then I ask them to listen for 3 things. What do you hear? And they'll identify 3 things they hear, 2 things they smell or can imagine smelling, and 1 thing they taste or they can imagine tasting. Now, oftentimes we can combine it also with cross-body tapping. If I'm regulating somebody in session, I'm usually tapping on the sides of their legs because, again, that helps my system regulate. It's a soothing kind of a movement for the brain, and we can get back regulated pretty quickly with the 5 senses exercise. Another type of meditation I love is walking meditation. So with walking meditation, lots of times what you do is you go out and you are going to walk outside somewhere. So find some place where you're walking to off in the distance so you know where your destination spot is. And as you're walking to that destination spot, tune into your body and just feel your feet on the ground. Notice them. Notice the rhythm, the pattern. You might even count with it. Maybe you're just aware of your body. Like, what do I feel in my head right now as I'm focused on my destination spot? I'm walking forward. I'm just noticing. Maybe I'm noticing my body's temperature, or I'm tuning into my breathing and notice my breathing. So as you're walking, tuning into your body, looking ahead to where you're going. It's a great way to kind of walk and meditate. See if you can calm your head that way. Another thing I like is doing the walking meditation. And as you're walking, look around for things in your environment that you're grateful for. So it might be, I'm so grateful that it's overcast today. In Arizona, we love overcast days, right? Or I'm so grateful that the temperature is so beautiful. Or I love the flowers. I'm so grateful for the flowers that I see. Or even just about life. I know that's a hard thing to do when you're in the middle of crisis and you've got a lot of hard things happening. But there's a lot of research from positive psychology that they do the 3 good things exercise daily. And if you do that for a month, we see a decline in depression and anxiety in the individual who's doing that practice. So it's such a great way to just go out and walk and just think about what you're grateful for. Okay. Journaling is another way, another form of meditation. So with journaling, you might go through some reflective questions I'm going to give you in a moment. You can also, if you're trying to figure out why am I dysregulated or trying to calm down, I'll tell my clients to use the dominant and non-dominant writing. If you've ever done this, it really slows your brain down. It calms monkey mind. So I write a question with my dominant hand. So for me, it's my right hand. And I answer that question with my non-dominant hand, my left hand. So the question might be, why am I feeling so fearful right now? Right? And then answer that. Again, it's going to be hard to read it. I've had clients even bring it in, right? But the interesting thing is, as they're reading it and they're interpreting it, right? It slows everything down. It calms down that critical monkey mind and it brings forward, right, some of that data in your brain that's going to help you be more aware of what's going on. I love art journaling. Get a book. Make that something that when I am taking the pause, I'm going to go to my journal and I'm going to just draw what I feel right now. So be aware of your colors. Maybe you use pastels. Maybe you use colored pencils. There's so many different things you can use, but maybe you just write on that paper what it feels like. In group, I will give the group members an outline of a female body. And I will have them then take the colors, the markers, whatever. And in that moment, I want you to write what it feels like inside of you, right? What does it feel like on the outside of you? So those are all things you can use with art. So just journaling for awareness is another great way. Of course, listening to guided meditation is also wonderful. And the reason I say guided meditation is that it's much easier to meditate when somebody's giving me instructions and guiding me. Oftentimes, if I'm still battling with emotional regulation, my brain's all over the place. I'm in my stories. So you want to have your playlist of guided meditations, about 20 minutes in length. You want to go to some place to be alone. I prefer doing guided meditations laying down or reclined, but get yourself in a place. And as you're doing that, focus on the words, focus on your breathing, and just listen to the words, because oftentimes they're giving you instructions, and it's a great way to do meditation. Again, the research shows that 15, 20 minutes a day of guided meditation over the course of 8 weeks strengthens the connection to the prefrontal cortex. What that means is that when you do have a trigger, you're going to be able to stay working and operating out of that prefrontal cortex longer. So it's really important. Then the last tool is questions. And these are the questions that I have found for me have been the most helpful in when I'm triggered, getting me to kind of understand what I'm going to do next. So what the questions are that I ask myself, the first question is when I'm triggered, okay, what do I really want right now? So what's going on? Right? What do I really want? And then I know I'm in my stories, so I'll ask myself, okay, how can I change my thinking to support what I really want? Then I ask myself, how can I do it differently? How can I create a positive outcome? So when I start filtering it through some of these questions, again, I have to connect to prefrontal because I've got to come up with logic, reasoning, and emotional regulation. Now, mind you, you can't go straight to these questions. I want you to understand, excuse me, this is a higher level of thinking. Excuse me. So with this, you've got to be regulated, right? So you've learned how to regulate, you've got your skills and tools in place, and then you learn to add some of these questions. These are great questions to journal. So you can take the pause, take the time out, have these questions in the front of your journal, sit down with the situation, and just write out those questions. Okay. So I hope that today, as we talked, I've kind of shared with you how powerful a pause is. We always have a choice, although our brain often tells us that we don't. But in the healing process, one of the keys to emotional regulation is recognizing what's going on with me, what am I thinking, how's my body reacting, and then having that boundary in place, that pause boundary, so that I know that I can take some time to do self-care, because basically what I've talked about today is self-care. Slowing it down so that you can determine the next step and that you can respond rather than react. And that's where you start to see the healing happen, is in that space between the trigger and then how you choose to react or respond. So I hope that's helpful today. And again, we welcome all your questions, whether it's on the topic I have today or something else that you're wondering. But I'm hoping that this is something that you can easily apply to your situation.
Thank you. There's some great questions in here, so I won't take too long. But I was thinking when you're talking about the walking meditation, one of the things that I really did learn to pay attention. And we live in Arizona. There are some wonderful plants that bloom overnight, and then the flower closes up. And I'm an early morning walker because you have to be in Arizona, and like to be able to be grateful for how lovely those are. And like, I literally, every time I see those, I go, oh, they're so beautiful. And what a gift. You know, this is why I get up, like, and it completely changes my energy, just paying attention to those things. And, if I was just, doing a power walk or whatever, I completely miss that. So I love the intentionality of that. I wanted to ask you, because I think you're really clear on it, but I wanted to just clarify, when you're talking about journaling, you're talking about non-dominant hand and dominant hand on the one thing, but like, I think lots of people want to journal on their technology. And I think, yes, thank you. I was gonna say, I think it really does need to be written, right? Or drawing, like if you're coloring,
Yep,
right?
it does. It does. We need that eye-hand coordination. That is so important. I know we're so technology dependent that we're going to just, and I'll have clients just, okay, I want you to kind of keep track of this. You can just, bullet point it in your phone. But when we're processing emotions, and this is kind of a form of narrative therapy, we really do have to write it. It's got to be pen to paper, pencil to paper. Absolutely. That's where it's almost like therapy. It really is. And it's something that you can do that's really going to help you process in the moment.
Yeah, well, and even the breathing, and I love that you said, like start with the, start with this. It's almost like a cleansing breath to get ready for the next things, And I do 4-7-8 breathing, because like in 2 minutes. But I also do a lot of the, like, we live in Arizona. I'll take my shoes off and just pay attention to what's underfoot, and I'm sorry, consciously thinking about, I'm grounding myself. Like, it's an intentional, I'm grounding myself, and that helps. So all of these things, I love that there's all these tips and tricks and tools. And like Debbie said early on, it's like, find a couple of things, that generally work for you. And there's some things, if you're sitting in the, middle of the grocery store and get triggered, you're not going to lay down and do a breathing. I mean, so it's like, what can you do on the fly, and what can you do like in, like when I have intention, and what do I need to do to kind of hold the space so that I can go process that. So, and the more tools you have in your arsenal, and I love that you talked about too, the more times the brain does it, the more able the brain is to go, that's going to help, rather than the safety seeking that doesn't. Because I even put, like all of those things that we do, like, because like managing the ups and downs, the bad dreams and nightmares and everything. And I was like, it's the emotional dysregulation is exhausting. It's just exhausting, trying to do all of those things or manage and control and whatever. So what you're giving is the, like, take a pause, process through it so that you can be intentional, connected, choosing your actions rather than reacting. I always think too, with the emotional dysregulation or reaction, you're like the pinball machine or a, table tennis. Yeah. You're yes, a ping pong ball or a pinball machine. Yeah, but you're at everything else's mercy. And we talk about the Empowered Women's Retreat, which we have again October 24th through 27th. And like, we're really looking at how do we regulate and how do we have a plan, not based on what's happening with the other person, but you talk often about the internal boundaries. And I had someone ask, and I'm just going to put a plug in for it a minute, because somebody thought, oh, that's only for people who are new to this. And I was like, no, honestly, if somebody has just had discovery, they probably are too dysregulated, but so no, it really is for people who are going like, I want to find healing for myself and be on a different path, regardless of what that person does or doesn't do, not being stuck. So more information on our website. Debbie and I would love to see you there. So this is a great question, and we get lots of time questions, and so I'll be fascinated to hear your answer. What duration is the crisis phase?
Well, the crisis phase varies, and I'm going to tell you why it varies. First of all, there's so many factors. And off the top of my head, the crisis phase can be anywhere from 3 months, which I think is kind of short, to up to a year. Now, when I have a client coming into me, some of the factors that determine how long do I stay in crisis is that, does this individual also have other traumas, right? Where they've been in other crises, other situations. So it's almost like I've got a crisis on top of crisis. So their system is already kind of ramped up for being dysregulated because they've been dealing with a lot. So with that, that means their bandwidth for handling things is very narrow. Bandwidth means they can't stay connected to prefrontal. Their brain has learned to live out of that limbic region to create safety. If that's the case, we have to spend more time increasing that window of tolerance, right? And that is just done through repetitive self-care, through exercises, through sometimes it's talk therapy helps a bit. It even can be if your therapist determines there's some somatic work you can do, but basically it's teaching the body how to calm down. So with my clients, it might be I do visualizations in session to calm their systems down. So stabilization is just getting where we have some emotional regulation. Yes, you're still going to move outside that window of tolerance, but do you have the ability to, when you're outside the window of tolerance, to get back in it? Do I know what to do? Or is there this repetitive cycle of reacting, reacting, reacting? Another part of the crisis phase is you need to be educated. So you've got to have information and understand what's happening. Why is my body reacting this way? Why is betrayal trauma so hard? Why is my partner who I want to move close to my trigger? Why is my partner creating trauma in me? So we need that information to understand what's going on. We also need to know that we're not alone, that this is very common, what you're experiencing for a betrayed partner. So a lot of that is just understanding what betrayal does to our system and how it affects us emotionally and mentally and spiritually. And then how do we support ourselves in those areas? It's also having the right kind of therapist that help you through the crisis phase, because I have seen clients come into me that have been in crisis because they haven't had the right kind of therapist. And so they've almost had some additional trauma as a result of some of the past therapy. So they're in crisis phase or they're back in it for maybe a little bit longer than they needed to be. The other thing is just understanding there's hope for healing. That's another thing that I try to support my clients in, is that hope phase. And when we talk about the crisis phase, I mean, this is talked about in codependence. And so I look at every client that comes in, and one of the first questions we ask is, okay, when was discovery? When was D-Day? And I might have a client that has had multiple discoveries, multiple D-Days over multiple years. So you can imagine that they might have a very narrow window of tolerance. It might take us a while to pull them out of crisis because they maybe just recently had a new D-Day. Or if you're just a few weeks post D-Day, then you're definitely going to be in that crisis phase. So my goal is, when my client first comes in, is to just teach them that the number one thing we're going to do is we want to get you stabilized. We want you to start to feel a little bit better, right? Or at least understand what's happening. And the other key is I always like to find support. That support in that crisis phase, people who've either been through it before, or the people in your life that are there to support you, help you co-regulate. So very, very important. So I look at the crisis phase anywhere from 3 months to 12 months, but typically it's more like, I find a lot of them, they need to have disclosure. And once we can regulate enough to do disclosure, and then we process post-disclosure, then I see them moving out of sometimes some of that crisis phase, because, you know, they have all the data at that point. Hopefully they have all the data at that point, and then that way they're processing it. But remember, with disclosure, we're also working through the impact letter, the restitution letter. So a lot of that helps move you out of the crisis as well.
And it's more difficult to, I think, stabilize and regulate when the betrayer is still betraying, you know. Like, honestly, I can tell you lots of partners who have found healing regardless what he does or doesn't do. That's, you know, again, the retreat, we don't talk about him. We're talking about, what do you need to do to take care of you, so that, same thing, not pinball, not, you know, ping pong table, like what are you doing so that you have some stability and support for you, regardless of what those things are going on. So I love that you shared there's hope. You know, we want to stabilize and have hope, you know, for that. So, okay, the next one is, Where is the line between betrayer is supposed to hold empathetic space for our trauma responses and normalize them versus we're being too reactive and it's not okay? I'm trying to find my voice and get comfortable with expressing my anger and hurt. Is yelling ever okay in trauma response? I'm 12 weeks out of discovery, no disclosure yet. We have joint and separate therapeutic support.
So glad you have joint and separate therapeutic support. You are smack dab in the middle of the crisis phase. Absolutely. And you're still fighting for connection, right? You're still trying to process, all the new information you've gotten and the fact that there's been this big disruption to the attachment with your partner. So I see that sometimes the yelling and the anger, it expressing that way is very common when you're still in crisis. It's okay to be angry. Gosh, I work on anger even at the intensives that we do, the empowered women retreats. We really work on anger because that's a part of it. So we do have to have a voice, and we have to put a voice to our anger.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's after you're more more regulated. Right now for you, because you haven't had disclosure, you're still kind of in that stabilization phase, you are going to find that you've got more anger and your emotions are more like this. It's just a fact. But with the support and help of your therapist, hopefully you're getting the skills and tools that when I do get dysregulated, then all of a sudden I'm figuring out how to help myself regulate a little more. Now, one of the jobs, to answer the first part of that question, one of the jobs of the betrayer, the recovering partner, is that they have to learn how to have empathy and hold that space. And they have to learn how to sit in really uncomfortable conversations and witness your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a higher level skill set. I'm going to tell you right now, because in the early days, what you see with the betrayer or the recovering partner is that they are very defensive, right? They haven't broken through all of their defensiveness, their denial. They also have a lot of shame. And shame says, oh, I got to defend myself. I got to get angry, or I'm going to turn it back around on you and I'm going to gaslight you. And so that's what you're up against. So the dilemma I see is I've got a betrayed partner, early weeks of, discovery disclosure, and I'm going to my partner for comfort, the one who's hurt me. And then they get angry and they don't have space and they don't have empathy, and it hurts me even more. And it's unfortunate that it happens like that. So that's where, as a betrayed partner, sometimes you can't turn to the betrayer, the recovering partner, because they're learning. The reason they have this, addiction or the out of control sexual behavior is because they've not learned how to manage emotions and they don't know how to manage shame. And so they still have to learn that. And the goal is they do get to that place and they do get to where they can sit in the hard conversations and let you have those. For right now, turn to your therapist. Find a support group. There's so many drop-in groups. There's other groups that, Seeking Integrity has that are great for betrayed partners, especially 12 weeks in. And get the support you need elsewhere so that you can understand and really find your voice and learn how to express your anger. And we don't have to do that screaming and yelling. I mean, I can be extremely angry, and I've learned that if I go low and slow, that some people are more afraid when I go low and slow than when I yell and scream. So again, comes down the road. That's part of healing. That's what you're working towards. It's not going to be easy. I understand that. I've lived it. I know that. But eventually, the more you practice it, the more you take the pause, the more you take the time out, the more you do self-care, then you'll figure it out and it'll become easier. But it's okay to get angry. It's okay.
And yeah, I was thinking rather than is it ever okay on trauma response, is it getting you what you want? Somebody asked about the 4 questions and I typed them into the chat and I thought, what do I really want? And is yelling at someone getting you what you want? And maybe it is. I don't know. But is there a way to do it differently that I can create a positive outcome? And I'll tell you what, if somebody's yelling at me, I'm backing away and like I'm out of there. I'm not like I guess I'll do a flight, because so I would not show up to help fix whatever it is. We would not be working together, problem solving to create a positive outcome. and so I think that's my only comment on it. Whether it's right or wrong doesn't matter. But is it really helping you in any way? If it is, all good. If it's not, taking a pause and going, what is it I really want? If I'm looking for connection, if I'm looking to be heard, yelling I absolutely know if somebody's yelling at me, I shut down and I'm not hearing. But if I'm able to show up and be curious, but yeah, the empathy thing, like I always say, every addict, doesn't matter what form, is in like kindergarten for empathy, and so it's going to take them time to be able to actually do this well, like on a college level, so 12 weeks since discovery is like really very early in this process, but I'm telling you, there's hope, and you're probably right on track with everything, and it's really uncomfortable and painful, and we've got lots
Yeah.
of resources for you.
And the limbic brain tells us to fight for connection, right? Stay in it, right? We got to fight this out. The problem is you're both limbic and there's no logic, reasoning, and emotional regulation when you're operating out of the limbic part of your brain. It just creates more disconnection. So the more we can learn to slow it down, take a time out, use that pause, like Tammy said, ask those questions. The goal is connection. The goal is repair and connection. And of course, for you, healing from betrayal trauma, and for the recovering partner, right, to get into recovery. And so it's hard to do that when we are so limbic all the time.
Well, and I often use the analogy, especially if you guys are in a pattern, um, uh, you know, I do this, you do this, I do this, you do this. I said, that's the negative two step. And you guys can you can wear out the floor, you can wear grooves in the floor, and nothing's going to change. So at the end of the day, are you moving towards each other? Are you going to create connection if you keep doing this, and and I find I do much better if we're talking about it when it's not in a heated situation, because it's going to happen, it's going to happen. So having the discussion of like, when we get into this, like, take the pause, like Debbie said, or even like, I'm looking for empathy, and empathy for me would look like, be like, remember kindergarten, what do you need that's going to look like empathy? Because otherwise it's just this big word that I have no idea what it is. But if there's something you can do, if there's some actions that can be taken that would show, that, even if it's repeating back to you what you're saying in a non-defensive way, like maybe that's, you're early in the process. Go back and watch lots of Debbie's webinars. She's got great tips and tricks, for things Dr. Eddie does, getting to the other side for relationships. So there's lots of content on our website. We have previously recorded webinars. This will be posted there too. But you guys are very early in a process of trying to do a relationship different than you've done before. So the next question is a great one. Isn't all of this just trying to tolerate something that is completely intolerable?
That is such a great question. You're right, it's intolerable, right? Especially if you're in a situation where you've had this betrayal and it is so overwhelming and you feel like you're never going to get better. There is that space. And I'm going to reframe that, because what I had to learn in my own betrayal journey and my recovery journey, I didn't have people who were there to kind of give me the skills and the tools. And fortunately, I found a trauma therapist who had experienced betrayal trauma and could guide me and help me heal from mine. And so we don't have to just tolerate bad behavior. I want you to understand that. For me, it's about shifting from tolerating to stepping into being empowered. And we talked about that a lot. With empowerment, that means that I can not just tolerate, but I can recognize boundaries to put in place so I'm safe, boundaries to put in place that create connection, that I know what I can do when it starts to feel intolerable, that I know I can move into self-care, that I can be okay, that I have choices, right? Rather than just sitting and having to tolerate. It is hard. And that's where, when it feels so intolerable, right? We know we have to have other people to help us heal. And so we're not just going to sit and passively, right, be hurt as a betrayed partner and allow the person to continue to hurt us and betray us. What we want to do is we want to be able to be grounded, operate outside from that part of our brain where we are making the healthiest choices possible for us. So we do feel safe. And when we've got behavior from that betraying partner that's intolerable, then we know that we have the ability in a grounded way to make the choices for the next step. Do I need to move out of the relationship rather than just tolerate it? Do I need to put certain boundaries in place that then that betraying partner, the recovering partner knows that, I need this for safety. And if you're not willing to do it, then I can no longer stay in this relationship. And that's a really hard position to take, but sometimes it's necessary because the goal of recovery is that we're no longer tolerating, we're healing. And if you're tolerating it, that to me indicates that the other person isn't doing their job. They're not in recovery. They're not healing. But yes, we're doing this to create safety for us so that we can be empowered and step into, right? If I want to have anger, then I have a voice with my anger and I can express it, right? If I need to take a pause and do self-care, then I recognize it and I do that. If I see that somebody's doing things that hurt me, then I know exactly what to put into place as far as a boundary for creating safety. So yes, it feels intolerable. I do want to validate that, but we don't have to sit in the intolerable. What I'm trying to do with betrayed partners is to empower them to have the skills and tools to move beyond that. Whether their betraying partner, their recovering partner chooses to do that or not. And it's hard. For some of us, we moved on alone, right? Others, we get to move on with the partner. It's all hard. And at times it all feels intolerable. But with the right skills and tools, the right support, it is doable. I promise you it's doable. I'm living proof of that.
I agree. Okay. The next one, this is interesting too. And do you have a couple more minutes to stay?
I do. I do.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions. Doing the five senses exercise really agitates me while trying to do it. I struggle with it. Is there a particular reason for this? I've not heard that before. Have you?
I haven't. Well, I would encourage you to do five senses with somebody else helping you. Maybe
Oh,
they guide you. My other question, if you were in my office, I would just want to check in with you and see how easy is it for you to get in your body, right? Are you
mm,
used to tuning into your physical body, or have you learned in your lifetime to disconnect from your body? Because some of us, if we've had earlier traumas, we learn to disconnect from our body. It's a form of dissociation. So I don't want to feel my body. And so now you're telling me to tune in and right and find things and feel my body and then use that to regulate. So for you, it might be a different approach. It might be just learning to feel your body's connected. So like with some of my clients, I might do kind of a light stream visualization where we bring in colored light and move it through your body, right? And we use that to kind of, help you regulate. Sometimes I'll identify the emotion. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's anger. Okay, let's just imagine that light moving through your body, moving through every cell, dissolving all of the anger, letting it go, and then we let it pour out the bottoms of your feet. So maybe getting used to doing that type will then help you tune in. But here's the bottom line. If the five senses exercise agitates you, don't do it.
don't
Don't
do it.
expect yourself to do it. Come up with something else. Yeah, maybe something else works for you. Maybe for you, it's going to be cross-body tapping, right? And listening to, a meditation. Maybe for some of my clients, it might be, I'm going to go out all by myself and I'm going to scream really loud 2 times. For somebody else, it might be, I'm going to go bike and I'm going to go bike around the block. So find what works for you. And it might not ever work for you, and that's okay.
Yeah, but interesting when you talked about the disconnect because we experienced it with somebody at the Empowered Women's Retreat where like it was almost like they had no sensation below their chest because everything was so stuck here. So when you said that, I was like, oh, that I mean might be, but I agree. If it's not helping, don't do it. So okay, two more, and this is a really they're both great. Okay, can you speak to what kind of support groups can help with healing? And these sound like those verses might keep a person stuck. I find some groups veer and stay, vent and stay venting about the partner. And I find these less helpful for healing my betrayal trauma. Thank you for saying that. And yes, if the focus is always on what that person does or doesn't do, again, you're at the whims of everyone else, and there is not healing. And we work really hard with our betrayed partner groups from a codependent lens. There's a person there to, we don't use codependent language. We're not bashing anyone else. We understand that the behaviors were problematic, offensive, abusive, etc. But labeling and being stuck, there's a difference between being a victim of the behaviors and being stuck as forever being a victim, for the next 20 years or whatever. Gosh, we always want people to have healing, and it's possible. And stuck is stuck. So can you talk more about what you would look for in groups?
What I look for in groups is you want to find somebody who's leading the group who really understands betrayal trauma, like Tammy said, through the codependent lens. There should be psychoeducation as part of it, meaning I am learning how to move beyond my betrayal. I'm getting skills and tools. In my group right now, we're doing grief and loss. They're doing grief and loss artwork, and they're moving through their grief and their loss. And we're not focusing on, the recovering or betraying partner. Yes, we might process a situation that's come up, and I'm trying to figure out how to manage and handle it. But the goal is not we're going to come and just vent about how bad our partners are. Because I want you to keep in mind that for most people who have betrayal trauma, they want to stay connected to the betraying partner. And so when I go into a group and we're venting about the partner in a very negative way, what that does internally for me is it stirs me up, right? It can activate me, right? I start reacting. And then when I move back into relationship with that person, I'm more likely to be triggered, right? The other thing I see happen is when this venting is going on is somebody will say, well, my husband did this and is acting out. And then I have somebody else in the group that's going, oh my gosh, that's what my partner's doing. Now I'm going to go home and I'm going to just, get on them and make sure that they didn't do this because I just heard that that's what, partners do, betraying partners do. So we have to make sure that you've got somebody who's a well educated moderator, somebody who runs the group, where there's psychoeducation, where they have boundaries in place up front. The goal is of this group is to work on your own healing. And yes, if we do talk about the betrayed partner or the betraying partners, that we have boundaries around it. So I love Brene Brown calling, this when we get and talk about other people, common enemy intimacy. We're not creating connection in group by talking badly about the betraying partner. Yes, we can come to session and we can work through situations, but again, it just stirs it up. It creates more disconnection. So find somebody who's a CSAT, and if you're going to join their group, ask to talk to them, find out what they focus on, find out what the materials are. Seeking Integrity has a great group. Just do some of your work beforehand and ask them, what happens in your groups? You guys spend a lot of time venting about partners, the betraying partners, or are we going to focus on my healing? And what does that look like? What will you be doing in groups?
In 12 step, we talk about stick with the winners, and we're looking, because people can come to 12 step and stay really stuck and not really change, or the people that are actually doing the work to move through it, they're the ones that change, and everybody gets to choose. So this is not, there's no judgment. But man, being on a healing path is, like to have joy regardless of what's going on, and and to like myself. I'm not turning into a bitter person because of the stuff that has happened. Everybody has stuff. It's just how we choose to and I often share Gabor Mate. So Dr. Eddie Caparucci, September of last year, did a webinar, and he quoted Dr. Gabor Mate, who said, you can't make what happened unhappen. You can't. Like, that's already happened. But how you choose to view it every day is the trauma that happens. So I mean, that's telling me if I choose to traumatize myself every day, like at some point, like that's on me. And again, this won't be popular, but like those things happen. They absolutely happened. But working through them, grief is a process. Debbie did a 2-part webinar on that before. There's no quick, I'm just going to shove this in the closet and be all good. No, So it's a process, and we find healing, and in the joy we find peace, and we also find our strength. One more thing, and then we'll go to the last question. But Dr. Rob has talked about, there's no super glue for fixing the brokenness of an addict, but where we find the healing, we are stronger. Like, those are the places we won't break again, and we can also use that to help other people. So there is so much good that can come out of this. This is, nobody asked for this, and this is what we got. So how can we turn and move it into a positive place? So last one, how do you, or can you give some examples of how to change your thinking in regards to the second of the 4 questions? So how do I change my thinking?
Well, I check in with my story. What's my story right now? I'm going to give you a really quick personal example. My husband rides motorcycles. He had had an accident that wasn't bad. He just laid down his bike, and then he comes to me one day and says, I'm going to go for a ride, and he's going to go alone. Now, mind you, when he laid down his bike previously, he was with a group. So my brain goes into fear. So I thought he was going to be gone 2 to 3 hours. He'd agreed to that. When he's gone 5 hours, I text him and I get no response. So I am now in my head. And in my head, I have him dead at the side of the road. So then I reason and go, no, somebody would have called me. So he's ignoring my text messages. So now I get this story of, he's so disrespectful. I can't believe him. When he walks in, I'm going to tell him this, this, and this. And then all of a sudden I remembered the questions and I went, okay, what do I really want? I just wanted to know he was safe. So how can I change my thinking? So I had to step out of my story, which was, he's doing this to me intentionally. He is disrespectful. He is ignoring me. So the next question was, how can I do this differently? So instead of him walking in and me jumping on him and going, why did you ignore my test? You're so disrespectful. I can't believe you did this, right? I chose in that moment when he walked in to say, hey, how was your ride? So glad you're home. Funny me, I had you dead at the side of the road because you were gone longer. And then I took a little bit of a pause. And then again, I'm asking myself, how can I create a positive outcome? Well, I still need to talk to him about, why didn't you respond to my text message? So I let a few minutes go by. He came in, got settled, and I went in and I said, hey, I sent you a text message and you didn't respond. That really worried me. How come you didn't respond to me? And his response was, I was on the freeway riding my bike when I got it. I couldn't text you back. And I didn't stop at any lights where I could text you back. And that made sense. So I had to look at my story and go, okay, I had to focus on what do I really want rather than let my story guide me. So that's just kind of a way that I do it. Sometimes our stories are real. There's a lot of facts to our stories, but the important thing is, what do I really want? How can I create a positive outcome?
And for him, hopefully he goes, I agreed to 2 to 3 hours. So the next time I
Yes.
will pull over in a safe
Yes.
place, and I will absolutely let you know in advance.
Yes. And that was the latter part of the conversation. Exactly.
Yes.
So moving forward, we need to do this differently, right? So I'm not worrying about you for, an
Or
hour.
catastrophizing and and getting ready to blow up the house as soon as you walk in. So
Exactly.
I love it. So thank you, everyone. Great questions. Thanks, Debbie. And I will see you a week from tomorrow. So
yes,
in person. Yes. All right. Bye, everyone.
bye.